All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Vincent Datchety. I'm the president and CEO of Mental Health Colorado. The Equitas Project is our national initiative to disentangle mental health and criminal justice. Thank you so much for joining our virtual conference series on mental health, excessive sentencing, and the death penalty. This conference series, hosted by the Equitas Project and the Eighth Amendment Project, has been offering 60-minute panels each day this week to explore the intersection of mental health, excessive sentencing, and the death penalty. All of the sessions have been recorded and will remain available on our website for you to share or review. I just wanted to make a few comments and observe that among the nations of the world that Americans generally hold to be our peer nations, the US is unique in its persistent use of excessive sentencing and the death penalty. We hope that as you join us for each of the panels that we've assembled, you'll consider the 360-degree impact of our nation's attachment to torturous or nearly torturous punishment, inequitably administered, on the mental health of everyone involved, not just the individuals facing excessive sentencing, but also the jurors, corrections officers, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, mental health providers, advocates for social change, political actors, taxpayers, and all our children who so fervently want to believe and trust that ours is a just and humane nation. None of us who have our eyes open to the status quo of our system can experience the well-being to which we should aspire. Now, before we get started today, I want to thank Sarah McGee from TASME and Stephanie Fauché from the Eighth Amendment Project, who have been indispensable to putting together amazing panels this week as co-planners of this event. I also want to thank Emma Troten and Adam Goss, my colleagues from Mental Health Colorado's Equitas Project. I want to acknowledge the very generous support for the Equitas Project from the David and Laura Mirage Foundation. All of our advocacy work is possible only thanks to the generosity of partners and allies and donors like you. Thank you so much for your support. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's session, which will be a screening of the documentary film Too Ill to Execute. We're fortunate today to be joined by Patricia Earnhardt, filmmaker and family member of murder victims. Thank you both. Thank you for joining us. And Sarah McGee, our planning partner from the Tennessee Alliance for Severe Mental Illness Exemption, who will be moderating a discussion with Ms. Earnhardt, I think, after we see the film. So with that, thank you both so much for joining us. Sarah, with you.
Thank you, Vincent. And it is wonderful to be a part of this planning committee, as well as be with all of the audience members today. Briefly, by way of my background, I am a former public defender. I have represented both children and adults in state court here in Tennessee, and prior to law school, I worked as a victims advocate as well. But for the past 5 years, and this is how I met Patricia, and along with members of the TASME Coalition, I've been trying to pass a severe mental illness exclusion to the death penalty here in our state. And TASME is made up of quite a few organizations that are either mental health or criminal justice reform organizations across Tennessee. But if I could briefly introduce Patricia before we start the film, she is an amazing, they've produced many films for various nonprofits and other entities. And she's going to share more with you about her story after we watch the film. But I know from working with her on this film that this one was especially important to her, not only because she is a surviving family member of murder victims, but also because she is a family member of someone living with severe mental illness who has been in prison now for over 3 decades. So she's not only our filmmaker, but she is someone who has lived this experience. And we so appreciate her willingness to be here with all of us today. So the film's about 30 minutes long. And after the credits roll, we hope you will stay for some question and answer time. You can even start typing the questions down in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen there as we're watching, and we'll be able to check those as soon as the credits roll, and we will get to as many of those as we can. So without further ado, allow me to share my screen with you and get this film started, and I'll see you all again in about 30 minutes. Okay, here we go.
I decided to sponsor a bill that excludes the death penalty for individuals that are severely mentally ill, because I understood as a physician that severe mental illness is a biological, pathological disease of the brain like any other medical illness.
Persons with severe mental illness don't have the true rational ability to form the decision-making that a person without the mental illness has. So by setting out in the law that a person with severe mental illness is not subject to the death penalty, you can still have responsibility for the crime, you can still have life without parole, but you don't give them that penalty that's reserved for the worst of the worst.
With severe mental illness, their ability to think things through, control their impulses, weigh their options when they're deciding what course of action to take is impaired. I think as a society, we can't put people with severe mental illness to suffer the ultimate punishment.
We ought not to put to death people who are not as able to control themselves and their behavior because they've got a severe mental illness. It's just not right.
If someone has a diagnosable mental illness, whether treatment has been successful or unsuccessful, they should be excluded from the death penalty.
The Supreme Court ruled a number of years ago that people who have intellectual disabilities, and they called it mental retardation at the time, could not be put to death because they didn't understand what they did was wrong because of their disability. Likewise, several years later, the Supreme Court ruled that juveniles under the age of 18 and even children could not be put to death because of their youth and inexperience and immaturity, couldn't understand what they did. And the people, the individuals with severe mental illness really are in that same category. So they should not be put to death for the same reasons.
Regarding the insanity plea, so hard to show. You've got to show that you didn't understand the wrongfulness of your actions. It's a high bar to meet. It is rarely used, and even more rarely is it successful. In the 1% of cases where it's raised, 25% of those cases is successful. Not guilty by reason of insanity is not going to keep people with severe mental illnesses from being executed.
In the penalty phase, jurors more often than not and prosecutors turn the mitigation of mental illness into an aggravating factor. Instead of looking at the fact that their mental illness was behind what they did, they created into something that they should punish them worse for. It just is not effective in the mitigation phase because of how it's used by prosecutors and how it's perceived by juries.
The jury winds up thinking they're even more dangerous because this is somebody who can't control themselves because of their mental illness. Let's solve that by executing them. Put on evidence of mental illness. It could backfire and make the jury more likely to want to see you executed. With regard to competency to stand trial, the question there is whether you understand the criminal proceedings and can assist in the preparation of the defense. That is a very low standard. And competency to stand trial doesn't answer the question of were you impaired at the time of the offense because of mental illness. The competency to be executed. The question there is, do you know why you're being executed? So that's not going to apply in a lot of circumstances. And that also doesn't answer the question of, were you mentally ill at the time of the crime? You could be severely mentally ill and not delusional about why you're being executed, and you will be executed.
I was diagnosed some years ago with bipolar disorder. It's been a challenge. You know, there's a lot of folks out there like me that are living with a mental health condition.
Often people think that individuals with mental illness are violent. That's not true. People with mental illness are far more likely to be victimized than they are to victimize other people. People think sometimes that they're faking, that they are looking for sympathy from other people, they don't want to work, that they don't want to contribute to society.
We all know people who have some degree of mental illness, but do we all know somebody who's been schizophrenic? Do we all know someone who is delusional? Maybe not, right? And so not having that experience, that life experience, allows jurors and other people in the community to otherize people with severe mental illness.
William was very compassionate. He was always interested in how other people were feeling and how you were doing. You know, he always had a good hug and a wonderful smile. His smile just lit up the room.
William's personality was mostly that of a very gentle, kind of dopey kid.
He was my friend. He was one of my best friends in high school, and I'll always remember him that way.
He was involved with Amnesty International, a couple other groups that were concerned with people who were more marginalized, folks that were maybe misunderstood, and I think probably he felt a little bit that way himself. Probably some of the first signs of his behavior changing already happened towards the end of high school. Sometimes he'd be very clean cut and he looked like he was doing okay, and sometimes I'd run into him and he looked like he, hadn't showered in a while.
He would also do things like walk around in the winter with no jacket and no shoes in the coldest day of the year and say that he was trying to condition his body to be invincible.
Clearly something was wrong, but there wasn't any indication that, he would do something violent or be a threat to anyone. After William was arrested for the attempted armed robbery, I was shocked and kind of assumed that he had gotten roped into that somehow, that he was trying to help someone. And as we found out later, the guns were not even loaded, like it was ridiculous. We had no idea that he was in prison that long, just waiting. And I know later he felt that his counsel was just sort of letting him rot there. So it was probably a perfect storm, just of people not listening to him feeling isolated, but at the same time not able to get privacy ever. Someone with his, whatever he was dealing with, that would have been intolerable.
An escaped inmate, armed and dangerous, is still on the run. This is the man police are calling a killer, 24-year-old William Morva.
Officer down.
I was stunned and horrified. I could not believe that he had killed anyone. It was very unexpected and not consistent with the person that I knew in high school. He felt that he had acted in self-defense and that he was merely trying to preserve himself and his life.
NBC has reported that in a phone call from a Virginia jail where William Morva was being held on attempted robbery charges, Morva told his mother, "Somebody wants me to die." Morva's lawyers say it's part of the evidence that he was in the grips of a delusional disorder when he subsequently made a bloody escape, killing a hospital security guard and a sheriff's deputy.
He in no way felt he had any choice. He had to do that. He had to get away. They were going to kill him.
He really believed that he had done something logical that another person would have done in his place and that it was justifiable.
It was very clear to me now something had come over him that he didn't have control over.
It wasn't surprising to me that he would try to escape that. It was surprising to me that he took some other people's lives in the process of that.
Severe mental illnesses are medical, pathological conditions of the brain. They're just like any other disease, like heart disease or diabetes or thyroid disease or cancer. It's not something that a person necessarily has any control over.
When a person has disruption in their thinking or their emotions, as thinking and emotional beings, that affects their ability to function in society. What makes a mental illness severe is the level at which that illness at that point in time is interfering with their daily functioning.
And what people don't really understand is mental illness can flare up at any time and any moment. And sometimes people that are struggling are not able to make the rational decisions that they really need to make in their life.
He was very aware that he had killed people. He wasn't under any delusion that this hadn't happened, but it was in his mind a necessity, a life or death situation, and he did what he had to do.
People with mental illness, because it's so difficult for them to navigate the legal system, they take a longer time to get through every single stage of the criminal justice process.
They're arrested more often than people without mental illness. They serve 30% longer. All of these statistics result in somebody who committed the exact same crime might serve 10 days. Somebody with a mental illness will serve 30 days.
They have more behavioral problems, more symptoms. They end up in restraint and seclusion. It's very stressful, and the symptoms can increase.
So many of these people with mental illness, the first time they actually get diagnosed and treated is they make the portal through the jail. And that's where somebody finally says, let's get you into treatment.
The search for William Morva dominated the news in August of 2006.
Stay indoors until authorities find William Charles Morva.
The shootings caught the attention of the entire nation, with cable news channels reporting the story throughout the day. Finally, when the arrest was made, ending the manhunt, they broke in with the news.
Let's listen to the local reporter on the scene. He has more details.
After he was arrested for the murders, I was in touch with him. We would write back and forth. I think he was probably more confident at that point that his case would be heard and it would be obvious that he had no choice. And I think he really believed that if the public heard his story and his words, that it would be completely clear that he was innocent of all charges and should be released. And it was difficult to know that that was not going to be the case. The jury, from what I could tell, was given almost no insight into William's mental health. There was not a complete picture. He was sort of painted as an eccentric person who didn't wear shoes and who had strange ideas. and liked animals, and yeah, it was pretty weak. I thought certainly his counsel at that time was having him evaluated. I thought that there would be some basis for an insanity plea and that he would get some treatment, but I would find out later that wasn't happening. During the trial, character witnesses were only invited to be there the very last days and the days that we testified. The things that I was asked, both on the stand and beforehand, were very brief. They didn't seem to get to anything that could show William as someone who had changed, someone who had mental illness. It didn't get to the root of something really serious being wrong. I don't think William was aware really of how serious it was, because I think he felt it was so obvious that he was innocent. He was aware that, yes, there were very serious charges against him, but I think he thought that given the right opportunity for the truth to come out, that he would be set free. Unfortunately, as the case went on, his own insistence on things worked against him.
So many people of all strata of society has had serious mental illnesses. This could happen to anyone. This could be our children, this could be our nephews, it could be our cousins. And when this happens, these people really don't have any control over their impulses, and they're unable to distinguish between fantasy and reality. And when they commit a very serious crime, they may need to be punished if they don't reach the standard of insanity, but they don't deserve the death penalty either.
Now, I understand what most people saw about William who didn't know him. I mean, he looked like a monster. He shot someone who was unarmed, and he attacked someone who was doing his job. But William didn't understand that he had another option. And so we don't do ourselves any great work of justice by executing someone who can't comprehend what they've done.
Do we as a society want to spend our money pushing people through the legal system and putting them to death, or spend that money on treatment, research, trying to figure out how to better care for our vulnerable individuals, help people earlier, and even put that money towards helping families and helping victims?
The American Bar Association showed that Tennessee has spent between $57 and $75 million since 1977 on the death penalty for seriously mentally ill people. And before we start on a very long, drawn-out process, let's say we're not going to put people to death that don't have the wherewithal to understand what they've done.
William Morva has been sentenced to death. A Virginia judge imposed the jury's recommended sentence for the jail escapee who killed a hospital guard and a sheriff's deputy, setting off a lockdown at Virginia Tech University. At Morva's sentencing on Monday, defense attorney Thomas Blaylock pleaded for mercy.
They came in and they read the verdict. William turned to us and said, you know, don't worry. He comforted us, which was a wonderful gift to us, but it was both selfless and strange at the same time.
My attorneys, they just did a good job of trying to ask you for mercy. I don't ask for that. Because to be quite honest, I think there are very few people in this whole courtroom who even know what that word means. I can't fight. There's nothing more I can do. But there are others like him. And soon they're going to get together. They're going to sweep over your whole civilization, and they're going to wipe these smiles off of your faces forever.
When they did do the sentencing, he turned around to us and he said, "Don't worry." He sort of mouthed to that. So he still, even through that, I think felt confident that through the system that the truth would be heard somehow.
Great sorrow that I announce the death of Corporal Eric E. Sutphin of Montgomery County Sheriff's Office.
My dad was killed when I was 9 years old. I remember the day entirely. We were just told that an inmate escaped from jail and that he killed my father on the Huckleberry Trail, which is somewhere we would go frequently. My dad loved to bike, so we would bike there all the time.
Deputy Sutphin has been very diligent in the efforts to apprehend William Morvo, the suspect from the hospital shooting yesterday. This morning at approximately 7 a.m., Deputy Sutphin encountered Morvo and was fatally shot.
Little girls always look up to their dad. I remember that one of the first words I learned how to spell was sheriff, because he would point out each letter on his car. And for me, he went out each day knowing that he might not come back. He was shot for the first time when I was in kindergarten, so I was aware that it could happen again. But I always thought, like, oh, he survived the first time, he should survive again. However, I remember it was very much put into us that we had to say "I love you" at the end of every conversation because she did not know. Most of the details were hidden from us, and I chose to look into it more when I was older. I was curious about what was going on in this trial and what exactly happened that day. Mr. Morvo was hiding on the side of the trail. It is thought that my father did not even see him. His gun was still holstered. I suspected that William Morvo had some mental illness early on, and I wonder also the time in solitude confinement, if that did not make it worse, since the prison did not grant him any treatment. Later, I saw a few videos. The videos are hard for me because of his face. He seems so full of anger and fear. It is hard to see that in a person. I never had anger towards William Morvo. I understood that he was scared. I have seen the jail and I understand why he would want to escape. I think largely I felt fear. I was afraid if he killed my father, what would stop him from killing me? I lost that fear of him because I saw him as a person.
A man convicted of killing a Montgomery County Sheriff's corporal and a hospital security guard is now set to be executed. Judge today granted Attorney General Mark Herring's request to set William Morva's execution for July 6th. This follows the U.S. Supreme Court's refusal to hear his final appeal. Morva was in jail in the summer of 2006.
Governor McAuliffe issued a statement this afternoon saying he will not spare William Morva's life. This comes after growing requests for clemency from his attorneys, advocacy groups, and even one of the victim's daughters. Many people argue Morva had a severe mental illness when the murders happened back in 2006.
It's the hardest part of my job. I didn't sleep a wink last night thinking about this. Is a very, very, very tough decision. As governor, I got to enforce the law. I want to be consistent in every one of these that I have looked at to make sure I'm doing the exact same thing I did before, enforcing the law.
In accordance with the order from the Circuit Court of Montgomery County, Virginia, the execution of William Charles Morva has been carried out in the manner prescribed by the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Death was pronounced at 9:15 p.m. When asked whether he had any last words, Mr. Morva responded no.
When I think about William's execution, that day was very difficult. On the one hand, I was somewhat relieved that he's not having to suffer without treatment anymore, but at the same time, the whole point was that he would get treatment if he could be evaluated properly and have a trial again. I am glad he's not suffering, but I do miss him, and I feel like, though what he did was very serious, I do feel that the system really failed William and his family. I can't imagine anyone going through knowing the day and the minute that you were gonna die. I certainly can't imagine what he went through for years in solitary confinement, just getting, his mind getting worse and worse.
He was shaking. He started gasping for air. His stomach came out and then contracted pretty dramatically.
The execution of William Morva provided me with no solace. Instead, I saw it as another person dead. I was upset that the government wouldn't even reach out and speak to me to hear my point of view. And instead, they just went ahead with his execution. It was my dad. Shouldn't I have the choice?
And happening today, an activist group will push Indiana lawmakers to make exemptions for criminals that have serious mental illness. The goal is to spare mentally ill people from the death penalty. The proposed legislation will be filed today, and it aims to protect people with conditions like depression, PTSD, and traumatic brain injuries from the death penalty.
I think the reason why we have a growing bipartisan movement to eliminate the death penalty for people with severe mental illness, it's because it's the right thing not to take someone's life for committing a crime when that person at the time of that crime was significantly impaired by severe mental illness.
We need to set these standards so that persons with serious mental illness aren't subject even to the death penalty. Take it off the books, just like you took off juveniles and persons with intellectual disabilities.
I think this whole experience was a real eye-opener for me, just the way our system works, the way it doesn't work. To get so much public support and so much of an outcry from around the world against his execution, and for us still just to say, well, that original trial, from what I've seen, covered him, like, this original trial didn't get into William's mental health.
I believe by having a severe mental illness exemption for the death penalty, that families of the victims, of people like me, we would be able to have more support. My mother suddenly became a single mother of 2 twin girls. No, there was no child support either. And I would have appreciated more from the state instead of them killing a man and then thinking, oh, that'll make everything okay for my family. I think so many people believe that just because my dad was killed, that means I want to kill William Morva too. I believe just having my presence, speaking out and telling people that not all victim family members want the death penalty is important. I might not have been able to save William Morva, but maybe I can save someone else. And then his death will have meant something. And that's what I hope for.
Hi, Patricia. Welcome back, everyone.
Hi, Sarah.
Still gets me several years later. Thank you for your hard work on that film. And I'm going to check the Q&A, but while I do that, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you're comfortable with our audience, both about your family's experience as well as anything during this filmmaking process that particularly struck you.
Sure. I first got involved with Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty back in about 2009. And I can remember in my first meeting there that people went around and introduced themselves. And I noticed that someone else mentioned that they'd had a family member who had been murdered. And so when it came to me, I told about my own family's experience. And after that, I was asked if I would mind going out and speaking about it. And so I have done that. But it really showed me that how important it is that people speak up. And it also helped me realize that so many people believe that anyone who's had a family member murdered will want the perpetrator to be executed. And listening to Rachel Sutphin, and in my own case and others, it's just not true that everybody would want that outcome, because as Rachel so eloquently stated, it just, I can't imagine that it could bring any solace to me to know that someone else has been killed after my own family members have been killed. And just to tell my story briefly, both my grandfather and my aunt were killed by my cousin, who was my aunt's daughter and my grandfather's granddaughter as well. And my cousin fortunately did not get the death penalty. She is in prison and got a life sentence with the possibility of parole. But I just can't imagine that if she had been given the death sentence, and what I do imagine is that would just, excuse me, add another trauma onto the trauma I'd already experienced. Sorry. So, yeah.
Well, I know that it must have been hard for you. That was obviously an especially unique voice in the film. You and David were able to capture the perspective of our Tennessee State Senator, Dr. Briggs, who's been sponsoring legislation here for several years. He is a Republican, a medical doctor, a veteran. What was your experience like interviewing him for the film?
Yeah, I was really glad to meet him and very glad to hear his perspective. And especially, like you said, being a Republican, knowing that it's not a party thing. It really does cross the aisle. The knowledge of the fact that execution is not the answer, that there are many other things that can be done to help particularly the family members of murder victims, and particularly with the money that is spent, as he mentioned. So much money is spent on death penalty cases, and that money could be instead spent for help to the families, for help in the mental illness arena, for help keeping people from being in this position to begin with, really.
Couldn't agree more. I want to invite our audience members to put some more questions in the chat when you are able. No question is silly, and we want to hear from you. We are glad that you are here. Just so you know, that film is available on YouTube to anyone free of cost. You can find it just by searching Too Ill to Execute or go to TASME.org. We have toolkits to help you set up a film screening with question and answer afterwards with the answers already written out, if that's helpful to you. So if you think that could be useful wherever you are, you're welcome to use that. While we wait for more questions, I have some updates on successes in the movement to exclude those with severe mental illness from the death penalty. When that film was made, there had not been a single state that was able to pass a severe mental illness exclusion from the death penalty. Since that time, we have 2 states that have passed these bills and had them signed into law. The first was in Ohio, and that was not that long ago. I wrote up a little cheat sheet to give you the exact dates, but Ohio's, I believe, was in January of 2021, where they passed it into law, and it was actually made retroactive. And then just about a month ago in Kentucky, our very southern neighbor, but to the north of Tennessee, passed a severe mental illness exclusion into law going forward. And we are so happy for and proud for them. Other successes in the movement, there have been other states joining in. Arizona has filed a bill. There's been a total of 13 states over the last few years. Some are still pursuing it, some aren't. Some have passed full repeal, some are still trying to move severe mental illness exclusions. But recently, both South Dakota and Virginia, before repeal, passed their SMI bill through a full chamber of either their House or the Senate. So getting it out of key committees and then through the House or the Senate. And Tennessee and Florida have both gotten severe mental illness exclusion through key committees in their Republican-controlled state legislatures. So it's exciting. There is some momentum. And I think we'll have more good news in the coming years. Let me check our Q&A here. Some questions are coming in. I think one thing that strikes me as particularly ironic and sad is that William Morva's execution was the last execution in Virginia before abolition. And so after watching that film, that's particularly heartbreaking to think about. Let's see here. This is a great question from Kate. And Tricia, I'll let you take the first go at it, but I can try to chime in if that's helpful. How would you navigate a conversation with victims to explain that the death penalty is not equivalent to justice or peace for them?
Yeah, well, it's not easy because, you know, everybody has their own experience, and I don't want to tell somebody how to feel. I just know how I feel, and other members of my family as well. My 2 sisters, my mother, we all feel the same way, that, you know, seeing my cousin, knowing my cousin to be put to death when, you know, she has definitely a severe mental illness. There's no question about it. And, you know, it's not somebody's choice to have a mental illness. That's something that they get. And as Anthony Fox said in the film, mental illness can come on at any point in a person's life. With my cousin, it came on in her 20s when she was in college. And, you know, it got progressively worse. But I think I would just share with other family members that there actually are statistics that show that it is not helpful to most family members of murder victims. Is that what you understand too, Sarah?
Yes, from the studies that I've read. But I agree with your point that is obviously a difficult thing to bring up if someone isn't asking to have the discussion. That it just doesn't provide the closure that you hope it would. And trying to figure out what kind of restorative processes we can pursue that might better help is where I would hope we could use the funding we could save by not putting folks with severe mental illness to death. There are some great studies that show, I mean, there's studies about the death penalty as a whole, how much money you save if you don't pursue death versus a life or life without parole sentence. But there are also, the ABA did a case study and used Tennessee's death row and statistics, but it could be extrapolated to other states generally about how much you could save just not pursuing severe mental executions for people with severe mental illness. So I'd love to just somehow mark those to be turned right around to victim services or mental health treatment or resources for law enforcement that are overwhelmed by being the front lines for folks with mental illness. Thank you for answering that tough question. And I appreciate Robert chiming in that in Ohio, this comes from the Q&A box as well, it was retroactive and there was a 1-year deadline for filing petitions under the new law for those already on death row. So there was a limit put on that in that way. Thank you, Robert. And Jeanette asks, did Mr. Morva reject psychotropic medication while incarcerated and or after sentencing? I do not know the answer to that. And Patricia, I don't think you do either. Yes, I'm sorry we can't answer that. I do know Liliana Segura wrote a great article about Mr. Morva's life. And if you were to look that up, you may be able to get the answer to that question. But just for the sake of time, I know we have about 10 minutes left. I'll scoot on to the next question here. Thank you for that. Kathy asks, I think this is a lot like what Kate asked. I'd love to hear Patricia's thoughts about things to keep in mind when reaching out to victim family members. You want to add anything to what you already said there, Patricia?
I'm sorry, she wants to know what I would say to.
Just things to keep, Patricia's thoughts about things to keep in mind when reaching out to victim family members.
Well, I think obviously you have to be very sensitive to victims' family members. I mean, you know, there are people in my family who don't agree with my perspective, and I don't push anything on them either, because, you know, it's just an enormous trauma that somebody goes through, obviously, when something like this happens. And I think you just have to keep in mind that, you know, they've been through a lot, but I think really possibly just talking about the statistics of how people, other family members feel about it, and that, you know, people have gone through executions. This is my understanding, thinking that they would get relief from that and that they would get some solace from that. And they come out on the other end not getting that at all. And realizing that, you know, there's nothing that's going to bring your family member back. There's nothing that can. And so just adding one more death really does not solve the problem for them.
Thank you. If anyone else has any more questions they want to throw in the Q&A really quick, I know we are running out of time. As far as working on the legislation over the past few years here in Tennessee, you have helped with that. You have helped, you've met with legislators, you've spoken at events. Obviously, we very much appreciate that. Just for people who are new to this movement, this particular kind of legislation, there's several, lots of death penalty reforms that can be pursued. For this one, where we are, some of the talking points that we have focused on might be helpful to share with folks who are just learning about this. On TASMI's website, we have a fact sheet. This is the old version of screen sharing, I think, just like holding something up in front of the camera. But there are some sort of highlights that we like to bring up with legislators, because this is a dense topic and difficult to digest, even if you're used to talking about mental illness or the death penalty, which can be a difficult topic to broach for some. So if you are interested in those or pursuing something like this in your state, you can find that on our website. But I am getting a few more questions, so I will only come back to this if we have extra time. So that's at tasme.org. And someone asks here, Carol, Patricia, did you have dealings with the district attorney in your cousin's case? And did the district attorney agree with you? And only if you're comfortable answering that.
Carol, I did not have any connection with the district attorney at that time. And so I really don't have anything to add to that. So sorry. I was not involved in the trial.
And this will probably be our last question, I would guess. Do you have any thoughts on using a third party to reach out to victims' family members and loved ones who may be dealing with a homicide, a murder in their family? And if you don't have any feelings on that, it's okay too.
What about you, Sarah? Do you have any ideas on that third party? I'm not sure.
Well, I have never done mitigation work in a capital case. I would assume that would be helpful to have someone trained in trauma-informed care who knows the best practices to approach folks. That feels almost certainly, if the two parties are the family members of the homicide victim or the defense, that seems like a good choice to me, that it would be a third party. But I may not be answering that, may not be interpreting the question exactly right. There is something called defense-initiated victim outreach. Robert has put in the question and answer, offering that up as a resource as well. So I'm going to look into that when we get off of this Zoom myself.
Good.
So thank you all so very much. Thank you, Patricia, for making the film, for being here today. I appreciate everyone's questions. And again, you can reach me if you have questions later by visiting tasme.org. My contact information is on there. And you can find the film there as well. And we look forward to seeing everyone hopefully tomorrow for our last panel on ACEs, trauma-informed care, traumatic brain injury, with our panel of experts, moderated by Vincent Atchity. Thank you all so much for being here today. See you tomorrow. Bye for now.